everybody. It's so nice to see you all. Well, actually, I can't see any of you, but regardless of that, I want to have a very interactive discussion with you today about these thoughts that have been rattling around in my brain about radically reforming the nonprofit operating model and rethinking the nonprofit operating model. And I know a lot of people have been thinking about this because just a couple of days ago, I wrote a blog on this, and I was really happy. 1,000 people hit on it, and many people reshared it. So obviously, this is a topic that's on many people's minds in the nonprofit sector, not only in San Diego, but all across the country. So what we're going to do today is this. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about myself, for those of you who don't know me. I'm going to set the stage for the environment in which we're all working in. That's going to be a very depressing part of this presentation. So if you're emotional, be sure to have Kleenex next to you because it is not a pretty picture. I am going to then walk you through what I've been thinking about in terms of how we might radically reimagine the nonprofit operating model. And we're going to have some back and forth. I would really like you to do some writing and thinking and jotting down notes so that you can be my thought partner. And as we flesh out this concept and I can hear more from you. How's that sound? Great? Okay, so let's go. So let me tell you a little bit about me. I have been working with nonprofits for 40 years. Yes, I am that old. And in all kinds of different roles. As a staff person, I have had the insomnia of being a nonprofit CEO during a drastic economic downturn. Of course, I have never led a nonprofit during a pandemic because nobody has, but I have ridden those waves. Some of you know that I am the founder of the Nonprofit Institute at USD, and I created the Master's PhD Research Center and all the community education platforms. And I ran the Institute for 14 years and left 5 years ago to go back into the world of consulting to nonprofits full time. And my consulting work, this is probably not going to surprise you, involves a lot of strategy work, working with boards to help them work more strategically and with focus to advance organizations. I do search work. And then finally, I specialize in nonprofit lobbying. And I have the second edition of my book, The Lobbying Strategy Handbook, is going to be out at the end of November. So that's who I am. And now let's talk about how we're doing right now and what we're thinking. Walter, I got a wingman here, Walter, he's helping me out. So this is how we're all feeling right now, am I right? Especially if you're sitting around in your underwear with a beer this morning, you know, this is pretty much how you're feeling, having running a nonprofit or working for a nonprofit during these times. It's really, really awful. And one of the things I'm guessing, if you tuned in this morning, that the folks at the Nonprofit Institute talked to you about the latest survey that they did, surveying nonprofits in San Diego from March through the end of April. And what they found was not a pretty picture. Organizations all across the city are really facing radical drops in their income sources and from all kinds of sources. So that's depressing, not surprising, since everyone is feeling very uncertain about what's going on in the world. Okay. We can also see, based on a recent Gallup poll that was released a couple of weeks ago, that Americans have decided that they're going to give less to nonprofits and are giving less to nonprofits. And this is very, we're not surprised by this, but it's really unsettling. And I want to take you back to what happened during the Great Recession, which was from 2007 to 2009, there was a 17% drop in giving to nonprofits overall. And what's really disturbing, see, this is the Kleenex part, was if you look at the percentage of Americans that contributed to nonprofits overall, in 2010, 63% of Americans gave money to nonprofits. In 2016, it was 53%. So that's huge. That's huge. If I had to guess, I would guess that some of those folks are giving money to GoFundMe campaigns, so they're, sending money to individuals, they're still being charitable. But overall, people are giving less money to nonprofits. So it really, if it seems bleak and that things are moving in a bad trend line, guess what? It is, and that's what's happening. And and the other thing that I want to say, just as long as I'm being the bearer of really bummer news before we get to the exciting news, is that from that period of 2007 to 2009, 20% of nonprofits that had annual revenues of $1 million and below before the recession went out of business. So these are precarious times, and this is why we need to rethink how we're doing business. The last thing I want to tell you about this is that when we lose money as a sector, it really hurts our staff. I think you know that, because if you look at what the Nonprofit Finance Fund says, most of the money that we spend, you probably know this, I don't need to tell you this, goes towards paying staff salaries. So, it's heartbreaking because these are colleagues who we've grown to know and love, and they're just as motivated as we are to get up every day and fight the good fight for all the kinds of changes that we are trying to make in the world. And so there is no knight in shining armor. That's the bad news, is going to run in with like a pile of cash to bail us out. But I got some good news. We, you and me and all of us, are the knights in shining armor because we're resilient. We've done this before. We know that people are relying on us for a whole bunch of things, for all the good that we do. And we can reinvent ourselves and reinvent the sector and make this work. And I have confidence in us. And let's talk about how we are going to get there. And what I want to start talking about is this. Every single nonprofit on the planet that has ever been created was created because there were people who had a vision that they wanted to create a social good. And even if you didn't found your nonprofit, you just work 180 hours a week on it, you're doing it because you want the world to be better, whether it's through music that really makes people feel good, or you're helping people out of poverty, or you're working to provide medical care, or you're protecting the environment. Whatever it is you're doing this magnificent thing on the part of the world. And so what we have is we've got to reframe the discussion that talks about how we do our work. And the way that I want to reframe it is looking at our work in two different ways, in terms of mission work and management work. All right? And I really want, this is kind of a radical concept, but I want you today to help me think through siloing that work, bifurcating those functions, dividing it in two, and let's talk through what those look like. Okay. On the mission side, what our mission does, that slide's not supposed to be there. Go to the next one. Sorry, made a boo-boo. Okay. On the mission side, we are thinking about, it's not only the why we're doing things, right? We're thinking about how we do things, and in what ways. So what are those things that make our organization unique? And as I like to say, God is in the details, because God is definitely in the details. So I'm going to make an outrageous statement. I don't know if it's true or false, but I'm just going to use it as an example. If I was a betting woman, which I'm not, my husband loves Las Vegas. God knows when we'll ever get there again because of the pandemic. But if I was a betting woman, I would say that there are probably 20, 30, maybe more nonprofits in the city of San Diego that are dedicated to empowering young people by helping them gain access to higher education. And so why are there all these organizations that work on the same thing, that all have the same why, right? They know why they're doing it, because education is a key to success. But how they do that with the young people they work with and what they do is very, very different. And so when you think about your mission of your organization, I want you to be thinking about those three things. It's not only the why, which is super important. Why are we doing this? But how are we doing it? And what are we doing to advance it? This is really important. If it wasn't for those differences in the how and what, there wouldn't be 30 different organizations working on the same issue. And I could have picked any other issue, an environmental issue or a food justice issue or an affordable housing issue. There are lots of organizations I work with that build affordable housing. God bless them, right? So why do we need all these different organizations? Because organizations have different approaches to how they do their work. And that's what makes your mission unique and about you. Okay. So I want you to spend a couple of minutes and I want you to jot down your why, how, and what. So I want you to think about those. And I also want you to think about who. In other words, who within your organization is carrying out those functions, those activities? Who is it? Who is it on your staff that is making those activities and programs work? So take a couple minutes, jot things down, and then send me some love notes on the screen and tell me what you've been thinking. So let me give you a couple minutes to think. Okay. Well, they have to write. They've got to think. No, I want, they're writing. I'm open to reading.
Do you have a count of how many people are in the chat room? Is that 39 viewers?
Excellent. People and software. Oh, these are administrative functions. These are supposed to be mission functions. We have the wrong slide up here. Can we go back? There we go. I'm sorry, I got a great answer from Lynn Corbett about administrative functions because our slide was off base. So we are talking about mission functions. So we're talking about the mission activities. Sorry if I threw you off there. We're having a little bit technical difficulty, so I apologize. But we'll get to the administrative later. All right, so just to be clear with everyone, I want you to be thinking about your mission functions, the activities that you're doing to serve your mission. What are you doing? How are you doing it? And who in your organization is doing it? I'm waiting. Thank you. That's good. Come on, folks, tell me what you're doing every day. Great, thank you. So Amanda said, and can they all see each other's comments? Okay, great. So you're operating at the intersection of education, science, and the arts. So what are you really doing though, Amanda? Like, how do you do it? Tell me how you're doing it. Like, what are you actually doing? Like, what kind of programs? What's going on? How are you making your mission real for the community? That's great. So virtual music therapy right now, thank God. I'm sure people really appreciate that, Lindsay. Really important. So normally, and you're working with therapy for people who have mental health issues. What kind of people are you working with? Hunger relief. Excellent. And how are you doing that? So are you coordinating the distribution of food right now? I mean, that is so important. People have just been standing in line, and the food banks, I know, have been overwhelmed. So working directly to provide people with food. Mm-hmm. And using staff and volunteers to do this, I'm assuming. Yeah, great. Oh, that's wonderful. So breastfeeding, that's great. So newsletters and technical support to people, because it's not easy. So that's really important to do that. That's great. Oh, I love this. Aquatic therapy, that's fantastic. And that's really a specific thing for veterans and their caregivers. That's a wonderful thing to be doing. And it's very unique. I think it's unique to nonprofits in San Diego. That's wonderful. Love that. Oh, art to people with limited mobility. Fantastic. And I'm imagining this is a challenge right now because, you know, we are all having to struggle with the confines of life under COVID. But that's very exciting and important work. I'm looking at the screen just in case you're wondering, why does she keep looking away? I'm reading all your comments so I can see. Medically fragile, children and their families, active duty military veterans and their families, and community support. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Love this. So empowering women. So many of you are working with at-risk populations and people who desperately, desperately need your help. And this is so important. And it's also the reason why you exist is the reason why you have to stick around. So now let's move to the next phase, which is let's talk about the operating slide. Let's get there. Yeah, ta-da, we're here. Okay, so now we're on the right slide, which is always good. And what I want you to think about right now, and this is a separate list, are your administrative functions and operating functions. And I want to give you some examples of the kinds of things that I'm talking about. People forget, and we often forget because we're such goody two-shoes doing good in the world, that nonprofits are corporations. We're corporations. And we have to be in legal compliance on a lot of matters. So our board has to understand how to govern the organization effectively and transparently and within the bounds of the law. And believe me, I have been an expert witness on a nonprofit legal case where the membership of the corporation sued a board for the breach of fiduciary duties, and those members won. And I read back through 2 years of meeting minutes, and you could see how the board was not performing their fiduciary duties because they were making financial decisions that didn't make any sense based on the financial statements they were being provided at the board meeting. So being in compliance is not only filing your Form 990 every year, but it's making sure that you operate with transparency, with accountability, that you avoid conflicts of interest, and those kinds of things. So that's part of the administrative function. Ensuring that the finances are managed properly is really important. Now, sometimes if you're a small organization, and many organizations in the city are $1 million and below, we can have simple financial statements that we're presenting and talking about at the board meetings. But oftentimes it gets more complicated because we might own a building, or we might be lucky enough to have an endowment, or we might have a related business. We might be running a cafe that generates income for our theater, or we might have a clothing store like UCP does, that our thrift store that generates profits that goes back into running our programs. So we need to understand those things. We might have an organization like North County Lifeline that has revenue sources from many different kinds of government contracts and foundations and corporations, and that money has to be accounted for in a separate way so that we're not commingling funds. So fiscal accountability and fiscal administrative functions is a huge part of what we do. It's funny, I wanted to talk to Dr. Laura Dietrich about this before I proposed this to you, but I didn't have time, because I'm proposing that outcome measurement is also an administrative function. Now you might say, well, it's the mission function too. But the reason that I think it's a management function is because you're not doing the program, which is really the mission part, you're monitoring it, which I think is a more management or administrative part. So as nonprofits, it's not enough to say, we are providing aquatic therapy or arts therapy to X number of people a year, because people are not hamburgers. It's not so many burgers served, right? Or so many bagels that come off the rack that are made. It's really what kind of impact are we having on the lives of the people that we serve? And how do we measure that? And that's so important to telling our story about who we are as an organization, is that management function. Managing our facility is really important. Now, many of us are renters, but we might still have to make sure that the toilets are clean. And in this day and age of COVID, once we start reopening, and maybe many of you have started that process, we have to make sure that we have all kinds of cleanliness standards that are in place, so that, that would make Mr. Clean blush, because we're being so anal about scrubbing all the surfaces and making sure that our staff and the people we serve are safe and can walk into a safe environment. So all those are management functions. All right. So and there's many, many, many more. So when you think about this, let's go to the, oh, I'm glad you're listening, Laura Dietrich. Let's go to the question mark slide, which is next, which is, I want you to make a list right now of your management functions. And this is really important. I want you to tell me who performs those functions. Is it staff? Are they consultants? Are they volunteers? So I want you to take a couple minutes to write that down and tell me about your management functions and who's performing those functions. Good. So that's your mission function, Daniel Johnson. Tell me about your management functions. Those are your mission functions, Barney, and I love it. I love what you're doing. Tell me how you manage it. Good, Rebecca. Tell me the management side of it. I'm pushing you all, pushing you all. How are you promoting the museums? Is that an administrative side? Is that an operating thing that you do? Do you have a whole marketing arm that does that? Is that part of your mission, or is that really just the administrative piece of it? Okay, good. So you're scheduling things. Good. So that is an administrative function, which is excellent. Thank you, Marnie. Perfect. And that's a staff function that you are doing as a staff person. You're scheduling. Good. Payroll. Good. Financial management, tracking, software, facilities, staff, HR. Perfect, Chris. Yep. Good. So, excellent. Financial oversight, bookkeeping, paying bills, payroll. Yep. That's it. Love the little leaping logo, too. Leap to success. Love that. Good. Very good. That's great, Kara. So you're accounting, data, evaluation, full-time staff. HR is contracted out. Good. So staff is doing the mission on fancy. Who's doing the administrative fancy? Good. Very good, Daniel. Marketing, recruiting, data analytics, research. Good. Okay. Ticket sales, perfect. Yes, survey data, client intake. Accounting, contracted out. All right, we're going to talk about that. Bookkeeping, donors. That's good. Thank you, Samuel Lawrence Foundation. Good. 2-person staff. Okay, so let's go to the next. We have more coming in? Right. So here is the $65,000 question. How can we operate with greater economic efficiencies and effectiveness? Sorry, Walter keeps telling me I'm not standing in the right place. I'm doing my best to look at you while I'm talking. So how can we do that? How can we operate with greater economic efficiencies? This is what I'm driving at. And one thing that what I'm trying to get you to think about, if this is not obvious to you, is going back to the beginning and saying, what are the things that we do that are purely mission on the program side, and what are things that we can separate out that are really more administrative and management side. So the reason that I'm suggesting this is because funders will say to you, the answer is to merge. And I'm sorry, we mixed up the order of my cute little giraffes that have one body and 2 heads. Because funders will say, merge, merge, merge. And I just read an article that was written by a local funder who I won't name because I love her and she's a wonderful person, saying the answer is that nonprofits need to merge. And I do not think that that is the answer. And the reason I don't think that's the answer is because, going back to our discussion at the beginning, when you think about what you do and how you do it, that is different than other organizations that may have a very similar or related mission. And what makes you unique is important. But let me tell you something. Your administrative functions are not unique. And if you think about other nonprofits in the community, many of you are doing the same things. So how do we change the dynamic and the starting point of the discussion? So let's go to the next slide. Okay, how can you partner with other organizations and save money? And I want to talk and I want to describe what a partnership is, okay? A partnership is not a marriage. I've been married for 25 years. I am madly in love with my husband. It's fantastic. That's a different level. A partnership that we're talking about might not even involve a lot of dating. It will involve some dating. I'm thinking more about roommates, right? Haven't we all lived with roommates at one time or another? I know I had 3 roommates at one point. There were 4 of us sharing an apartment. And the important thing about picking out a roommate is you have to make sure, I'm a neat freak, so I want other people who are really clean and neat. You've got to make sure that you get along with your roommates. You've got to be able to live with them. But you don't have to marry them, and you don't have to be in an intimate relationship with them. You just have to work alongside them in a way that makes sense. So those are the kinds of partnerships that I want us to be thinking about, and I want to give you an example. Let's say in San Diego, and I'm making this up, there's a theater that has an annual operating budget of $1.8 million, and its mission is to produce plays that are about the immigrant experience. And they've been successful for a long period of time, and people just love them. And there's another theater in San Diego, and they have a budget that's about the same size. It's, $1.65 million. It's almost identical. And they're focused on Shakespeare. That's all they do is Shakespeare. Why should those 2 organizations merge? It doesn't really make any sense. Yes, they're both theaters. Yes, they both do excellent work. Yes, they enlighten people and cause them to think. But that doesn't mean that they should get married. But maybe they should become roommates, right? So how can we talk about people collaborating in a more effective way around these management and administrative functions that are separate from the mission functions? Okay? So, that's the partnering slide. So let's take, for example, the fictitious theaters that I just cooked up, working with on the immigrant stories and Shakespeare. What might they partner on? Maybe they decide we're going to co-locate. We're going to share rehearsal space. We're going to share a stage. We're going to share sound and lighting people so that we don't have to have our own sound and lighting people. Maybe they're saying we're going to use the same platform for selling tickets. And we're going to have one person or one consultant who works for both of our organizations do the marketing for us. It's taking those things, those functions that other organizations who are like yours do and putting them together. It's consolidating the functions without merging the organizations. So I want to think out loud with you for a couple of minutes, because I want you to think about forming these partnerships in different kinds of ways. So let me give you an example. We might have 4 organizations that are all in your neighborhood. They all operate, let's say they're all in City Heights, or they're all in wherever, in San Diego, whatever, Point Loma. And they might all be different kinds of nonprofits, but they're all around the same size. Maybe that's the group that you want to look to get together to start having conversations about people's administrative and management needs. Maybe you all need some kind of work done that has to do with figuring out a good program evaluation. And maybe you can get better economies of scale somehow if you do it together, especially if your organizations are more alike. So let me step back. Let me walk that back a little bit. You might be working with a group of organizations that are all your size that aren't alike. You could be working with other organizations that have similar missions that are all over the city. You could also decide if you are, let's say you're an organization that has a budget of about $1 million or $750,000, and you say, you know what? I want to partner with an organization that has a $10 million budget, because those people can do those kinds of administrative functions, with their eyes blindfolded. That's nothing for them, and it's really difficult for us because we're little and we don't have all that capability. So maybe what it looks like is a contract with those organizations to perform the administrative functions, rather than you having staff do it, or contracting with consultants to do it. And I know that this is going to mean very difficult emotional decisions about forming different kinds of working relationships. As I said earlier, you have people who you work with on your team who you so appreciate because you know that they care so much about the work that you do. But the facts are that there is going to be less money for all of us to do the work we do. And the most important thing we have to do is to preserve the mission. Okay. So if we think through, do I see collective impact? Absolutely, absolutely. How can we do it? How can we do it? How can we form these innovative, important partnerships to move things forward? Yes. So let's look at the next. Do you think there's an opportunity? Yes, I do. Okay. So I want you, again, to take a step back based on everything that I have been talking about, and I want you to really think through and make a couple lists. What is mission critical? What is mission critical? What's purely operational? Just make some squiggly preliminary notes right now. Just think about it. 2 separate silos. How do you make those 2 lists? By thinking about, again, the programs, the activities that you run that are all about the mission. So in other words, if you are tutoring people, if you're providing therapy, which some of you are doing music therapy or aquatic therapy, that's mission critical. All of the other stuff is the operating stuff, right? Visitation. That's good. Listening to your clients is so important. And I'm sorry, some of your, I can't read all of your comments because I can only read so many words. It's being cut off after a couple of sentences, so I apologize. Oh, good. You're welcome, Laura. Yes, sharing physical space. So important. Physical space, and physical space is really expensive. It's hugely expensive. Right. So sharing physical space is big. And oftentimes with physical space, there's also maintenance costs. So if you have someone to help you clean the toilets, woohoo, that's really good too, right? And all those things. Yes, your programs are mission critical, right. So you want to preserve your programs and look at the financial things. Let me give you another example. What about HR? The HR climate in California has changed radically, right? So how do we classify employees properly? How do we make sure that we're obeying the law in terms of all of that? Now, many of you are contracting out with HR firms or professionals to help you. But maybe it might make sense, again, if you partnered with other organizations or a larger organization, either to use the services of a full-time HR manager, if one is already existing at an organization, or maybe it's going to be more cost-effective if you have one person doing that for many organizations. Same thing with your finances. Same thing with your website. Same thing with your marketing. So if you think about all of those tasks, all of those administrative functions, what does that look like? Yes, physical space is good. Other thoughts? Community partnership, HR, yes, okay. Well, it's interesting because I want to talk in a minute, thank you for bringing that up about sharing databases, because there may be bright lines in your conversations with organizations when you say there are certain things that we don't want to go there, and I'm going to get to that in a minute, and that's very important. You've got to figure out what works for you and what doesn't work for you in terms of how you're going to collaborate effectively. Any other thoughts coming in? Very good. And a question is, can you share an admin? Is that possible with another organization? Or with an organization that might not have a similar mission, but has similar functions? You know, again, it's been so interesting that we're getting comments today from different organizations that do different kinds of therapeutic services. Maybe the way in which those organizations interact with their clients for appointments is similar. Maybe you could merge systems. Maybe there would be some efficiencies to be gained through that process. Okay, so how do we get to a point where we can really think through this carefully and begin to have these discussions? All right, Walter? Okay. So number one, continue the work that we have started today. Thinking very deeply and very honestly about your mission-critical functions versus your operational functions. And the reason that this is hard to do, and I know I'm repeating myself, but this is a really important point, is that you have people who are affiliated with your organizations who are working on those administrative functions, and you love those people, and they're your friends, and they're your soulmates in doing this kind of work. And some of those people are going to lose their jobs in the course of this process. I'm not going to kid you, I'm not going to gild the lily. Less money means fewer jobs, and that is a reality. And what we're trying to do here is achieve greater operating efficiencies for your organization, cost savings and operating efficiencies, operating better, doing things better, while we're still maintaining the mission. And that is going to mean letting some people go. So that's why, again, when you go back and you think about the mission and the programmatic and those activities versus the administrative things, you're going to have to make lists of things and also figure out who is responsible for what. What does that look like? Okay. Then, this goes back to the CRM comment, you have to have discussions with your board and your staff about what the bright lines are. So if we go back to the fictitious theaters, the Shakespeare and the theater that does stories about the immigrant experience, they might say, we're not sharing our season ticket holder lists. We're not into that. We're not doing that. That's got to be totally separate. Where there's no way we're sharing our donor list. Are you kidding me? We're not doing that. That's fine. Now, it's possible that you will actually get more crossover with your donors and your season ticket holders if you share lists. That's possible. But you don't have to do anything that you don't feel comfortable doing. And when you have these discussions and you start to think through what's possible, you have to figure out what you're willing to share and what you're not. And that's very, very important for the integrity of your organization, because you've got to feel good about these partnerships and these new roommates who you're picking. And then you're going to identify these possible areas for partnerships. You know, we've talked about some today that have come up across the screen: sharing space, HR, payroll, bookkeeping, functions. That's all come up, which has been great. Okay. Now, then I want to ask yourselves, when you go back and you make your lists of all your administrative functions, I want you to think about, well, we have these administrative functions, but there might be some that we're really good at. We are really good at this. I mean, we have systems in place that just rock for doing whatever it is. And you might think there might be other organizations that would be interested in having us provide those services because we do it really, really well. There are other areas that you think, boy, you know what? We really could use some help with X, you know, whatever X is, and try to go there. And then you want to ask yourself, who do we like, admire, and respect? And this is really important because you want to have roommates who you get along with, right? You don't want to have the dirty roommate if you're the clean roommate. You don't want to have the noisy roommate if you're the quiet roommate. You want to have roommates that are like you, that you balance each other out in a really healthy, productive way. And again, this who we like, admire, and respect, they might be organizations that aren't in a related nonprofit field. They might be totally different from us. Maybe they're larger organizations that we like, admire, and respect, and we feel like we could partner with them. So how do we do that? And what does that look like? Okay. So I want to open it up again for your comments, to hear what your thoughts are. And I'm also going to grab a tissue so he knows it. Okay. So tell me, is this resonating with you? What are some ideas that are bubbling up out of your magnificent brains as a result of thinking this way? How might you begin to conceptualize this for your organization? Come on, I know you have some great ideas out there that are rattling around. What about doing outreach? Oh, yeah. There are all kinds of organizations that have formed partnerships like this. So let me give you a couple of examples. There is an organization in Pittsburgh that's called the Mon Valley Initiative, and they provide all of the technical support to develop affordable housing for 27 community groups. So the groups, each of the groups get together, they do the community planning process, they work with their cities, they figure out how, what kind of housing they want to have, they are involved in the design of the project, but the process is orchestrated by a central organization that helps them. There are other nonprofits in, there's a nonprofit in Philadelphia that provides a lot of collaborative resources for arts organizations, and particularly theaters, and how can they provide, again, lighting and costume and all of the support that that organization needs. So it's a lot of times smaller nonprofits can also have organizations that are their fiscal sponsors that will do this at a lower level. But it's really thinking about, I want you to think in a very out-of-the-box way about how this collaboration could work for your organization. Yes, you have to work with people you trust. Absolutely. Well, that's a good question. So how would you approach them? First of all, you've got to be very clear on what you have and what you need. So don't sell yourself short. You know, it's like my friend always used to talk about a networking function that he went to, and people walked around and they had signs, and one said, and the sign said, "I have and I need." And he put a sign on his dog and it said, "I have fleas, I need a cure." So your nonprofit does not have fleas. Just because you are a tiny little nonprofit doesn't mean that you don't have anything to offer, right? So the things that you have to offer is the work that you do that makes an impact on the community. So you want to bring that to the table. You want to bring a very specific ask for the kind of help you need, and you want to be sure that you understand your numbers. In other words, you want to say, we need help with this, or with these 2 things, or 3 things, whatever it is. And you want to be sure that you know that the cost of doing those 3 things for you is X. Let's just say it's $100,000. And you want to go to this larger organization and say, we're wondering, would you be willing? Could we outsource those functions to you? Would that be a possibility, since you have such a large administrative structure? And if so, what would that cost? How would that work? How do you perceive that working? And if they say, well, sure, you could outsource it to us and it would cost you $150,000 a year, then that's not going to work. But if they say, yes, we would be interested in talking with you about that, and then you start the discussion that way. So before you can have any conversation, you really have to have the critical thinking. You've got to do this analysis much deeper than we've been able to do in an hour this morning, because you have to do the thinking by yourself, you have to do your thinking with other staff, you've got to do thinking with the board, right? You have to have these very serious discussions. You've got to look at your budget, and then you have to think, what's feasible, what's reasonable, what could we partner on that would make sense for us? Yes, Mission Edge can help with administrative and finance help. That's right. Mm-hmm. Yep, Fieldstone does great work as well. Excellent, excellent work. Mm-hmm. What other thoughts? Have any of you attempted these kinds of partnerships? What would you think? What would be the low-hanging fruit for you to make this happen? I want to say one thing about this process. This is not a silver bullet. I can't wave a magic wand and poof, it's going to just happen for you automatically. This is going to take thinking and planning and negotiation and, as my husband said, trust. It's going to take some trust as you develop partnerships. You are going to want agreements in writing. This is really important. So everyone is clear about what it is that you are agreeing on. But now is the time, now that we are still, for the most part, in lockdown, now is the time to really be reimagining our organizations and what they can look like. And even, God willing, in a few months, we'll be back to normal. I don't know when, but now is the time to prepare and to really think through what makes sense for our organization moving forward. That's excellent. I love this. Collaborating to provide educational content. That's great. Platform program. I love that. That's really great. Yes, the Balboa Park Culture Partnership has done some really good work. You can think about joint marketing. That's really important. And again, how can you achieve efficiencies? Is there one person who can do all of your websites rather than having a different person do that? Mm-hmm. Okay. So what I wish we could be having this discussion in person, and I'm hoping we can soon. I'm glad we were able to begin the conversation, and I'm hoping that you are going to begin the conversation or continue the conversation within your own organizations to really think through what this could possibly look like. I know I'm going to write more about this. If you don't already follow my blog, you can find me on LinkedIn or at patlibby.com if you want to sign up, because I'm going to be blogging on this topic. I'm going to be working on a project with the City of San Diego, the Arts and Culture Commission, where we explore how we can help theaters do some of this work, and I'm very, very excited about that. So let's keep talking. Feel free to send me an email if you'd like. Again, my website. Oh, I have a question. What could joint marketing look like? So let me go back. Joint marketing could look like either you're going to share a marketing person or even a marketing consultant who could achieve greater efficiencies by working for multiple organizations. You could, if you're working with similar organizations, you could have a joint marketing message. You could link to each other's websites. You could have cross blogs and things like that. So there are all kinds of things that you could do to build on the power of your allied organizations to do that. So thanks. So I want to close by saying I know these are really difficult times. I hope you're not sitting in your underwear drinking beer as you're watching this. I hope you are energized and feeling brave and confident that we can do this. And we can do it, and we can do it together. And it's going to require us to rethink the nonprofit operating model and to look at things in a different way. And I don't want you to think about it as we're just saving money, because don't go there. Part of it's saving money, but part of it is just realizing we can work more effectively and more efficiently by collaborating. So hopefully we're going to come out of this in a much stronger place, both fiscally and organizationally.